Hello. Today we have Anatoly Fomenko with us, and we will talk about the true birthplace of Christ on Cape Fiolent in Crimea. A separate hall in the Multimedia Museum of the New Chronology in Yaroslavl is dedicated to this topic. In the Nativity of Christ Hall, it is detailed why the Crimean Peninsula is the birthplace of Christ. Where the Cave of the Nativity is actually located. In what year this historical event took place. And who was the first to come to worship the Virgin Mary and the newborn Andronikos Christ. Anatoly Timofeyevich, hello.
Hello, Svetlana. Very glad to see you in our next podcast for our Museum of the New Chronology.
Anatoly Timofeyevich, please tell us how you and Gleb Nisovsky came to the conclusion that Christ was born in Crimea?
The birthplace of Christ is determined based on our previous findings. Let's discuss this map now. What is known? It is known that the Magi, who came to worship Christ, saw a star in the east, followed the direction of the star, and finally arrived and stopped over the place where the child Jesus was. They saw the infant and Mary, presented gifts to him, and worshipped Jesus. According to the Gospel, King Herod was in Jerusalem at that moment. According to our reconstruction, the Gospel Jerusalem is Yeros on the Bosphorus. Here it is located. In medieval chronicles, it was also called Ancient Byzantium. The Magi came to King Herod, asked how to find Christ, and following the star, went to worship the child. King Herod asked them to inform him where they would see Jesus, so that Herod could also pay him homage. After some time, the star led them to the birthplace of Christ. I reiterate that we already know that in the Gospel, Jerusalem is ancient Tsargrad, the city of Yeros on the Bosphorus. Later, 30 kilometers to the south, on the other side of the Bosphorus, Constantinople, Tsargrad, modern Istanbul was founded. Having received directions to Bethlehem, the Magi set out from Tsargrad, meaning they left Yeros on the Bosphorus. The Gospels do not specify whether they traveled by land or by sea. As it turns out, the Magi actually sailed by ship across the Black Sea. The question is, where were they heading and why in that direction? The main argument for choosing their direction was the guiding star in the east. They followed the guiding star. What star was that? We know that it was the supernova explosion of the year 1152. But at the same time, apparently, the famous pole star was also called the guiding star. The pole star is remarkable because it is close to the North Pole. It hardly moves. It remains fixed in the sky, almost stationary. So, it is convenient to use it as a guiding star. By projecting its position onto the horizon, you get a certain direction. Therefore, it is not excluded that the Magi left Tsargrad heading towards Bethlehem, keeping the direction precisely towards the pole star, i.e., north. When projecting the star onto the horizon, we get the direction of movement from Tsargrad Yeras, as shown in this diagram. The question is, where will the Magi arrive by ship, having chosen the pole star as their guide? It turns out that this is well known in sea charts and guides for the Black Sea, in recommendations for sailors and captains. It is well known, and experienced captains assert that if you leave Istanbul, Constantinople, and sail directly to the Pole Star, the ship will come precisely to Cape Fiolent in southern Crimea. This is a well-known fact unrelated to history. Thus, the idea arises that the Magi headed to southern Crimea and arrived at Fiolent. By the way, here we begin to realize, and not in vain, it is believed, that the caves of Fiolent were inhabited by the early Christians. This is a well-known fact in the history of Crimea. Furthermore, as we will see later, it is on Fiolent that the famous monastery of St. George is located, as well as the equally famous Rock of the Holy Apparition. Moreover, and we will talk about this a bit more, it is precisely on Fiolent that the unique ancient cave church of the Nativity of Christ is located, a cave shrine. Not just anywhere, but specifically on Fiolent. Therefore, our hypothesis is that Andronikos Christ was born on Cape Fiolent in southern Crimea. Let's look again at this map. Why does the ship arrive specifically at Cape Fiolent? Let's look at a modern map to understand what is being discussed. This is a map of southern Crimea that we are all familiar with. Here is Sevastopol, and here is Cape Fiolent. To the right, eastwards, is the famous Balaclava. To the left is Kazakia Bay, and further inland is Inkerman. We will talk about this separately. And here is Cape Fiolent. The question is, why do ships, moving towards the Pole Star, arrive at Cape Fiolent? It turns out that the Black Sea has stable currents. They are shown on this map. There are several stable circular currents. One of the currents operates as follows. Seawater moves in a circular motion counterclockwise. When a ship exits the Bosporus, from Tsargrad, from the Gospel Jerusalem, moving towards the Pole Star, i.e., moving north, the current carries her. And it turns out that this stable current will lead you precisely here. This is Cape Fiolent in southern Crimea. This effect is familiar to us. When, choosing a certain landmark on the riverbank, you cross a river with a strong current, you discover that you are being carried along by the current, and you arrive at another point downstream. The same effect occurs here. Moving towards the Pole Star, it turns out that you arrive at Cape Fiolent in southern Crimea. This fact, unrelated to history, is a strict rule for sailors in the Black Sea. Question. As we understand, in the actual scenario, the movement occurs along the current to the northeast. Why then does the Gospel mention movement to the east? The Magi followed the star to the east. This is understandable. The thing is, in ancient times, sea maps looked nothing like they do today. Such a map is a more recent achievement of cartography. Ancient maps often depicted seas as narrow, elongated straits or even rivers. Look at the famous Tabula Peutingeriana. It is considered an ancient Roman map. As we understand, this map was actually created around the 15th–16th century. It's a huge stretched map. This is a fragment. Here is the Bosporus and the Black Sea. The Black Sea is depicted as elongated, like a river, and on this map, it is oriented to the east. Therefore, looking at an ancient map, you would say that the Magi were moving eastward following the guiding star, although in reality, they were moving northeast and eventually reached Cape Fiolent. This explains why the Gospels specifically mention the east. Thus, in our reconstruction, the hypothesis asserts that this is the route of the Magi's voyage. Leaving Byzantium, also known as Gospel Jerusalem, Yeros, the same city as the famous ancient Troy. On a ship carried by the current, the Magi, as we have already mentioned, reached Cape Fiolent in southern Crimea, where the birth of Christ takes place.
Anatoly Timofeyevich, are there any depictions of this fact that have been preserved, for example, in art or cartography?
They have been preserved. Here, for example, is one of the ancient coats of arms depicting a voyage on a ship towards the guiding star. Most likely, this is the coat of arms symbolically representing the Magi's journey across the Black Sea toward the pole star, which is also the guiding star. Here is another ancient coat of arms. It also depicts the sea, a coastal city, a coastal fortress, a ship sailing here, and the guiding star, whose ray points directly to this castle, this location, on the sea coast. By the way, a side note. Even the names Bethlehem and Fiolent could have sounded similar. Some chroniclers could have voiced the name Fiolent as Bethlehem, and vice versa. In Russian they sound like Viflem and Fiolent. What is Cape Fiolent famous for? Let's look at another trace of a fact that the famous Catalan atlas brings to us. It is a huge atlas depicted on many sheets, portraying many events of ancient and medieval history. For us, the important fragment here depicts three Magi, three kings in golden crowns, riding on horses to worship the child Jesus. Let's look at the enlarged image. Here are the three Magi, three kings. Their names are known in Scaligerian history: Balthazar, Melchior, and Caspar. The Magus riding in front points with his finger, as we will see, to the guiding star, indicating to the other Magi where to go. And look at what is depicted in the atlas. Here are these Magi. The front Magus indicates the direction, and here is the guiding star. It is depicted right in front of the Magi. We draw a line in the direction of the Magus's hand, pointing to the star. And where do we end up? We end up in Crimea. We end up right at Cape Fiolent. Thus, even in this atlas, there is indirect but quite vivid confirmation. Even here, it can be seen that the authors at that time still remembered the true history, and when they drew the atlas, they carefully observed where the star's ray leading the Magi to Christ would end up. This ray will lead them to southern Crimea, to Cape Fiolent.
Anatoly Timofeyevich, according to the new chronology, who were the three Magi, Balthazar, Melchior, and Caspar?
In late Christian literature, in painting, and in sculpture, the Magi or wise men are usually depicted as men. In particular, it is believed that in Cologne Cathedral, the famous golden sarcophagus contains the relics of the three Magi. Next to the shrine stands a later sculpture, supposedly created in the 15th century, which depicts all three Magi as men. Everything seems clear, and there are no questions. However, if we carefully examine the depictions on the actual sarcophagus, not on the later sculpture next to it, we will discover a remarkable circumstance. I am showing Cologne Cathedral. It was actually created as a mausoleum for the three Magi. It is not just a cathedral. It is a grand church that, as we now understand, was built to house the relics of the three Magi. Here is a view of the cathedral from the side. Now let's discuss the events of the 12th century in the New Testament, the adoration of the Magi, and the baptism of Russia. This is the golden sarcophagus with the relics of the three Gospel Magi in Cologne Cathedral. Let's take a look at the actual sarcophagus. Here is the famous sarcophagus, lined with gold. It is believed to contain the remains or relics of the three Gospel Magi, Caspar, Balthazar, and Melchior. This is an image on the frontal side of the shrine. Depicted, on the right is Mary, the Mother of God, on a throne, holding Christ in her hands. Mary is crowned. She is a queen. And three Magi approach her from the left. Magus Caspar is kneeling and presenting his gifts, and behind him stand the other two Magi. This is Balthazar, and this is Melchior. They are united by a single arch, which is a conditional idiom. Very often in depictions, one Magus, Caspar, is already on his knees, bowing, presenting gifts to Christ. The other two Magi stand behind him, surrounded and seemingly united by a single arch. And what do we see? When a visitor looks at the sarcophagus, it is difficult to make out these faces. But fortunately, we have good photos of this side. We see that of the three Magi. Two have beards, Magus Caspar and Magus Balthazar, while Magus Melchior is a woman without a beard. Here is a close-up image of the Magi. It is quite obvious that this is clearly a feminine depiction. On the main shrine of the Magi, on their golden sarcophagus, Magus Melchior is portrayed as a woman. Perhaps this is accidental, although it seems strange to consider the depiction of the Magi on the main Christian shrine as accidental. But no. In Cologne Cathedral, there are many other depictions of the three Magi showing scenes of their adoration of Christ. Here is a stained glass window right above the sarcophagus, above the Magi's coffin. Virgin Mary, Jesus in her hands, Bethlehem Star, two Magi. Magus Caspar kneels, presenting gifts. Balthazar points to the star with his hand. And here is Magus Melchior. It is quite obvious that this is a woman. There is no doubt about it. A beautiful female face, a woman's attire. Here is her close-up image. Magus Melchior is depicted as a woman. In the same Cologne cathedral, there is another stained glass window. Again, Balthazar and Melchior are side by side. Both are blonde, light-haired, with European faces. Balthazar has a beard. He is a man. And here is a blonde, beautiful woman, with a feminine face. There are numerous images like these. Old depictions of the adoration of the Magi portray Magus Melchior as a woman. You can make sure for yourself when visiting various museums and art galleries. Pay attention. In many more modern paintings, you will see Magi depicted as men. Moreover, one of them will be a black man. We will talk about this a little later. But in many paintings, especially the early ones that better remember tradition, Magus Melchior is portrayed as a woman. In our archive and in our books, dozens of them have been published. In fact, there are hundreds of them. I will show only a few. Caspar on his knees, Balthazar, Melchior is clearly a feminine depiction. Magus Caspar on his knees, with Balthazar and Melchior standing nearby. Melchior is a beautiful woman, wearing a long dress. Men Balthazar and Caspar have beards. Next, Caspar with a beard on his knees. Bearded Balthazar. Beautiful woman Melchior in a feminine dress. Further, Caspar with a beard on his knees, bearded Balthazar with gifts. Beautiful woman Melchior stands next to him. Again, Melchior is a woman. Once more, Melchior is a very beautiful blonde woman wearing a crown, presenting gifts. Here she is. The next famous depiction. Caspar on his knees. Melchior is a beautiful woman in luxurious royal attire, wearing a crown, also ready to present gifts. Next, the following depiction. Caspar on his knees, bearded Balthazar. Melchior is a beautiful woman in a feminine dress. Woman Melchior with a beautiful hairstyle, feminine dress. Caspar on his knees. Balthazar. Woman Melchior. The next depiction. Woman Melchior, Caspar on his knees. Balthazar, both with beards. Baptistry in Pisa. Caspar in the front. The depiction of Melchior is very original. An angel supports her, embracing her waist, and the beautiful woman, clearly the Queen Melchior, takes off a long glove from her hand, preparing to worship the child Jesus. Another image, woman Melchior with gifts. A candid depiction of a woman. Again, Caspar on his knees, woman Melchior behind along with Balthazar. Again, woman Melchior. Here is a very beautiful woman Melchior with gifts. Wearing a crown, beautiful long hair. Here is a close-up image. One more depiction. These are the Magi resting in peace when they departed from this mortal vale. Two bearded men and a woman Melchior lies next to them. Woman Melchior, Caspar, Balthazar. Woman Melchior. Woman Melchior. Here is a detailed image. A distinctly feminine portrayal, a queen with a crown and long hair. And here is a black woman. The question arises, why did the later tradition depict the fair-skinned European woman Melchior as a black woman? Here is a black woman, also a woman by the way. Here is another depiction. a black man as Melchior. There appears to be a mixed-race woman here. She is not completely dark-skinned, but is depicted as mixed race. Here is another depiction. Melchior is a black man. Caspar is on his knees, and Balthazar approaches from behind. Where did this later tradition come from? Why did they obscure the fact that among the Magi there was a woman? First, let's ask the question, who were the Magi? Why was Melchior depicted as a woman? Our reconstruction provides an answer. The event took place in the 12th century. According to our reconstruction, Grand Prince Vladimir, which in Russian means ruler the world, the great Russian ruler attended adoration of the Magi. By the way, it is clear that his name Vladimir could later be pronounced as Volta Tsar, that is, Vladimir Tsar. And his mother was Princess Malka. She was called Malka or Malusha. Malka's father was Malk and she was Malka. Understood that the ruler of the world, that is, Vladimir, under the pen of some chroniclers, turned into Vladimir the Tsar and became Volta Tsar. Well, as for Melchior, this is Malka. Malka and Melchior, these names are practically consonant. By the way, the name Malka is sometimes pronounced as Tsaritsa, queen. Moreover, it is not excluded that the queen was petite. She was small in stature. The Russian word Melchia, small, is consonant with Melchior, and it could also have been transformed into Melchior, a small queen, small in stature. This is how the name Melchior for a female Magus could have originated. And the name Caspar is actually known in the Bible. We know that many names were read in reverse, as is customary in the Arabic and Hebrew languages. The reverse reading of Caspar gives Rabshakeh. Rabshakeh is a well-known military commander, a famous biblical character. Therefore, it is not excluded that Caspar symbolized the military part of the horde that came to worship. According to our reconstruction, 3 Magi, that is, 3 Mongols, 3 great ones, came to worship Christ in Tsargrad. The word Mongol used to mean, among other things, great. King Vladimir, Balthazar, his mother, Queen Malka, Magus Queen Melchior, and the Cossack military leader, Russian Caspar or Rabshakeh in reverse reading. This fits well with our reconstruction of the history of Russia Scythia. In this era, there were indeed 2 administrations: secular, the princes, and military, the Khans, Cossack military leaders, atamans. Later, from the 13th century, this power was called the horde. I would like to remind you that the words horde means an army. Therefore, King Vladimir with his mother represented the secular administration of the state, and the Cossack ataman Caspar represented the military administration. Perhaps he was the leader of the Cossack Khan Russian army.
Anatoly Timofeyevich, why did they start depicting Malka Melchior as a man in later paintings, and even a black one?
Apparently, the reason was quite simple. When they started disguising and altering history, confusion arose, leading to the following misunderstanding. In the Russian language, there are two words, cherny, black, and krasny, red. In the past, the word red used to sound like black. People used to say, red girl, meaning a beautiful young lady, or red square, meaning a beautiful square. The Great Queen, of course, was called beautiful. It was somewhat like a mandatory title. No wonder, on the stained glass windows I showed at Cologne Cathedral, the Magus Melchior is depicted as a beautiful woman even from a modern perspective. As a result, the words cherny and chermny were close, and the phrase red, beautiful queen, in the translation of foreigners could easily turn into black queen. That is, beautiful, red, transformed into black. Then the thought process kicked in. First, they started painting a black woman, and then they began to depict a black man.
Anatoly Timofeyevich, returning to Cape Fiolent, could you please tell us if there are legends in Crimea about the Virgin Mary and the birth of Christ in this place?
Cape Fiolent is a famous cape. At some point, the ancient Iphigenia lived here. It's a well-known place. Commentators write the following about it. The last tall cliff, beyond which the shore turns north, and at the feet of which the waves gnaw and dance with superior malice, is the famous Cape Fiolent. It was also called Parthenium or Parthenium. On it, a sanctuary to the Bloody Virgin Goddess once stood. This is Cape Fiolent. It is famous. It is believed that Iphigenia and Orestes hid here, in the cave of Parthenium. A sanctuary to the Virgin Priestess was established here. Iphigenia was a virgin and a priestess. A sacred place was created here. Gathering ancient information, here's what, for example, the Brockhaus and Ephron Encyclopedic Dictionary reports. Fiolent is a cape located west of the St. George Monastery in Crimea. Here stood the temple of the Tauric virgin Parthenius. Here, the Taurians sacrificed shipwrecked foreigners to their goddess. What is known about the Virgin Iphigenia? She is also Artemis, Diana, and the Virgin. Look, this is Cape Fiolent today. You can go there and see a scene like this. Behind us, and we will discuss this later, is the monastery of St. George and the famous cave temple of the Nativity of Christ. Ahead is the grotto of Diana. Here, according to local legends, was the shrine of the goddess Diana. We'll talk more about this later. Here is one of the depictions of Iphigenia, also known as Diana. Iphigenia is originally a nickname of one of the varieties of the goddess Artemis. Here's an ancient depiction from Pompeii. The famous ancient geographer Strabo reported that the Temple of the Virgin is located on the Cape Parthenion, near Chersonesus, precisely where Fiolent is. Many medieval and ancient commentators of Strabo believed that he was referring specifically to Cape Fiolent. Overall, Strabo wrote that the entire territory of Crimea is strewn with ruins of ancient fortresses, numerous capes, and mountains with names related to Parthenion and the Virgin, as explained by commentators. The patroness of Chersonesus in Crimea was the goddess Virgin. She was called the Taurian Virgin or Artemis. According to our reconstruction, Iphigenia Artemis is a reflection of the Virgin Mary. This memorial plaque tells about the St. George Monastery, which we will discuss later. These are ancient depictions of Diana Artemis in ancient mosaics, gems, and the like. This is how they portrayed the Virgin Mary in the era of the royal Christianity in the 12th–14th centuries. Here is the image of the goddess Virgin, Artemis, Diana, Iphigenia on Greek vases. Here is the goddess Diana in late sculptures of the 15th–16th centuries. Here is Diana, also known as Artemis. Here is an original image of the Virgin, the goddess Artemis, also known as Diana. Here is another image, and there are many similar images. As ancient sources say, the main sanctuary of this goddess was in Crimea, on Cape Parthenon, also known as Cape Fiolent in southern Crimea. I'll remind you that the name Parthenium or Partenite is a well-known word Parthenos, meaning immaculate. It was a standard epithet for the Virgin Mary, immaculate, Parthenos. I repeat, in southern Crimea, there are many names close to the word Parthenos, Parthenium, Partenite, and the like. In other words, Crimea was closely linked to the Immaculate Virgin Mary, Mother of God. Here, she gave birth to Andronikos Christ, and here she passed away. This is a separate topic that we won't discuss right now.
In a week in our next podcast, we will continue the conversation with Anatoly Fomenko about the true birthplace of Christ on the Crimean Peninsula. We look forward to seeing you on our channel and at the Multimedia Museum of the New Chronology in Yaroslavl. See you soon.